Imagine waking up in a cold, dark cell, the air heavy with fear, knowing your next words could save your life or doom you. This was the reality for countless innocents during the Inquisition, where truth was twisted and thumbscrews tightened, until confessions spilled. Let's dive into this chilling history. Chapter 1. The Dawn of the Inquisition. The Inquisition. Just hearing the word conjures images of shadowy figures, ironclad torture devices, and desperate cries echoing through. Stone dungeons. But what was it really? This first chapter, we're peeling back the layers of history to uncover how the Inquisition began, why it gripped Europe with such terror, and how it set the stage for the brutal practice of extracting confessions from those who had nothing to confess. This isn't just a history lesson. It's a journey into a time when fear ruled, and the thumbscrew became a symbol of unrelenting power. Let's step back to the 12th century and see how it all started. The Inquisition didn't appear overnight. It was born in a world of religious fervor, where the Catholic Church held immense sway over hearts, minds, and even kings. By the late 1100s, Europe was buzzing with new ideas, some of which the Church saw as dangerous. Groups like the Cathars, who rejected Catholic doctrine, were gaining followers in southern France. The Church called them heretics, a term that carried a death sentence. But rooting out heresy wasn't easy. People didn't just confess to beliefs they knew could get them burned at the stake. So, the Church needed a system, something formal, organized, and terrifyingly effective. Entered the medieval Inquisition, officially kicked off in 1184 by Pope Lucius III. He issued a decree called ad abolinum, which meant to abolish heresy. It was the Church's first big swing at controlling belief, and it laid the groundwork for centuries of fear. Now, let's get into how this worked. The Inquisition wasn't a single event or a single group, it was a sprawling machine. Bishops were initially tasked with sniffing out heretics, but they weren't always up to the job. So, in 1231, Pope Gregory IX upped the ante. He created a specialized group of inquisitors, often Dominican or Franciscan monks, trained to investigate, interrogate, and punish. These weren't your friendly neighborhood priests. They were educated, relentless, and armed with papal authority. Their mission: seek out anyone straying from the Church's teachings, whether it was a peasant whispering doubts or a scholar questioning doctrine. The inquisitors traveled from town to town, setting up tribunals. Picture a grim courtroom in a dusty village, square with robed men asking pointed questions, and villagers trembling as they answered. One wrong word could land you in chains, but here's where it gets darker. The Inquisition wasn't just about catching heretics, it was about control. The Church wanted to send a message: step out of line and you'll pay. To do that, they needed confessions, and they didn't care much if those confessions were true. This is where tools like the thumbscrew came in. A thumbscrew was a simple but brutal device, just a metal clamp that tightened around your thumbs or fingers. The pain was excruciating, and it could go on for hours. The inquisitors knew that pain could break even the strongest will, turning innocent people into confessors of crimes they never committed. Take the case of a woman named Beatrice, a fictional but authorial example from 13th century. France. Beatrice was a weaver, accused by a jealous neighbor of witchcraft. She denied it, but after hours under the thumbscrew, her resolve cracked. She confessed to meeting the devil in the woods, something she'd never done just to stop the pain. Beatrice's story wasn't unique. Thousands faced similar fates, their lives appended by accusations and torture. So why did the Inquisition rely on torture? It wasn't just cruelty for cruelty's sake. Confessions were gold. A confession meant the Church could justify punishments, imprisonment, exile, or burning at the stake. It also scared others into silence. If your neighbor was tortured into confessing, you'd think twice before questioning the Church. Plus, the inquisitors believed they were saving souls. In their minds, a forced confession could lead to repentance, sparing the accused from eternal damnation. Twisted, right? But that's how they saw it. They'd torture someone's body to save their soul. And the thumbscrew. It was cheap, portable, and didn't leave scars as obvious as whips or brands. It was the perfect tool for a traveling inquisitor. Let's talk about the people caught in this nightmare. Most weren't rebels or devil worshippers. They were ordinary folks, farmers, merchants, midwives accused because of grudges, rumors, or bad luck. A woman who knew herbal remedies. She might be called a witch. A man who skipped church. Maybe he was hiding heresy. The accusations were often vague and evidence was flimsy. Inquisitors didn't need hard proof. Suspicion was enough. Once you were accused, escaping was nearly impossible. The system was rigged. You could deny the charges, but that meant torture. You could confess, but that meant punishment. Either way, the Inquisition won. For example, in 1252, Pope Innocent IV issued a bull called Ad Extirpanda, which officially allowed torture in inquisitorial trials. This wasn't a secret, it was policy. The Church was saying loud and clear that pain was a valid tool for truth. As the 13th century rolled on, the Inquisition grew more sophisticated. Inquisitors kept detailed records, creating manuals like the Directorium Inquisitorum by Bernard Gui in the early 1300s. These were like playbooks for rooting out heresy, complete with tips on interrogation and torture. They'd ask trick questions. Like, have you ever doubted the Church's teachings? If you said no, they'd press harder, assuming you were lying. If you said yes, well, you'd just confess to heresy. It was a trap. And the thumbscrew was there waiting for those who didn't break right away. The psychological terror was as bad as the physical pain. Imagine knowing that any moment you could be strapped to a table, your thumbs crushed until you screamed. By the end of the 13th century, the Inquisition was a well-oiled machine, spreading fear across Europe. It wasn't just about punishing heretics anymore, it was about power. The Church used it to control kings, silence critics, and keep entire populations in line. But this was just the beginning. The thumbscrew, as brutal as it was only one piece of a much larger system of oppression. In the next chapter, we'll dive into the lives of the Inquisitors themselves, who they were, what drove them, and how they justified their actions. It's a chilling look at the men behind the torture, and it's coming up next. Chapter 2. The Inquisitors, Hunters of Heresy. Picture a hooded figure riding into a quiet village, his presence sending whispers of dread through the streets. These were the Inquisitors, the Church's enforcers during the Inquisition, tasked with rooting out heresy at any cost. In this chapter, we're diving into who these men were, what drove them to wield tools like the thumbscrew, and how they justified their brutal methods. This isn't just about the torturers, it's about understanding the minds behind the terror. Men who believed they were doing God's work while crushing the spirits of the innocent. Let's step into their world and uncover what made them tick. That the Inquisitors weren't random thugs. They were carefully chosen. Often from the ranks of the Dominican or Franciscan orders monks, known for their education and zeal. The Church picked them for their brains as much as their faith. These guys were theologians, trained in scripture and logic, able to argue circles around anyone who dared question the Church. By the 1230s, when Pope Gregory IX formalized the Inquisition, these monks became the Pope's personal task force. They weren't just priests. They were detectives, judges, and executioners rolled into one. A man like Bernard Gui, a famous inquisitor from the early 1300s, could walk into a town, set up a tribunal, and have the whole place trembling within hours. His book, the Directorium Inquisitorum, was basically a how-to guide for hunting heretics, complete with tips on spotting lies and breaking suspects. So what motivated these men? Faith, for one. Most inquisitors genuinely believed heresy was a disease that could damn souls and destabilize society. To them, the Church was the glue holding Europe together, and heretics were a threat to God's order. They saw themselves as shepherds guiding wayward sheep back to the flock of in, if it meant breaking a few bones. Take someone like Conrad von Marburg, an early 13th century inquisitor in Germany. Conrad was so fanatical he'd accuse entire villages of heresy on the flimsiest evidence, convinced he was saving Christendom. But it wasn't just faith. Power played a big role too. Inquisitors answered only to the Pope, which gave them authority over local priests, nobles, and even kings. That kind of power could go to your head. Some inquisitors, like Robert Le Bouger in France, got a reputation for cruelty. using their position to settle scores or line their pockets by confiscating property from the accused. Now, let's talk about their methods. Inquisitors were masters of interrogation. They didn't just rely on torture, though. They weren't shy about using it. It'd start with questions, simple at first, like, do you believe in the Holy Trinity? Sounds easy, right? But the questions got trickier, designed to trip you up. If you hesitated or gave a vague answer, that was enough to mark you as suspicious. They'd also use fear tactics, like threatening to bring in the thumbscrew before even touching you. The psychological pressure was intense. Imagine sitting across from a stone-faced monk who's calmly explaining that denying heresy will lead to stricter measures. For many, the threat alone was enough to spark a confession. But when words failed, the thumbscrew came out. It was small, portable, and could inflict agony without killing you, perfect for dragging out a session until you admitted to anything they wanted. Let's look at a real example to bring this to life. In 1307, the Inquisition turned its eyes on the Knights Templar, a powerful military order accused of heresy. The charges were likely fabricated. King Philip IV of France wanted their wealth, but the Inquisitors didn't care. They arrested hundreds of Templars and put them through grueling interrogations. Many were subjected to the thumbscrew and other tortures, like the rack. One night, a man named Geoffrey de Charny confessed to spitting on a cross during a secret ritual, something he later swore he never did. The thumbscrew crushed his fingers until he broke, giving the Inquisitors what they needed to justify burning him at the stake. Stories like Geoffrey's show how the system worked: accusation, torture, confession, punishment. It was a cycle, designed to keep the Inquisitors in control, but it wasn't all smooth sailing for these men. Being an Inquisitor wasn't exactly a popularity contest. Villagers feared them, nobles resented their power, and sometimes even the church thought they went too far. In 1242, 2 Inquisitors were murdered in Avignonet, France, by locals fed up with their heavy-handed tactics. The killers were hailed as heroes by some, showing how much tension the Inquisitors created. Plus, not all Inquisitors were heartless. Some, like Emeric of Aragon in the 14th century, wrote about the moral dilemmas of their work. Emeric admitted torture was a last resort, but still used it, believing the ends justified the means. This mix of conviction and cruelty made Inquisitors complex figures, not cartoon villains, but men shaped by their time and beliefs. What's wild is how organized they were. Inquisitors kept meticulous records, noting every accusation, confession, and punishment. These records weren't just for show, they were tools to track patterns, identify repeat offenders, and build cases against entire communities. If you confessed once, your name went into a ledger and you were watched for life. The system was like a medieval surveillance state, with the thumbscrew as its enforcer. And the Inquisitors didn't work alone. They had informants' neighbors. Snitching on neighbors, priests reporting on their flocks. This network of spies made it feel like no one was safe. A single rumor could bring an Inquisitor to your door, and once they were there, good luck talking your way out. By the 14th century, the Inquisitors had become a feared institution across Europe. Their power came not just from torture, but from their ability to manipulate fear and guilt. They didn't need to thumbscrew everyone. Most people confessed just to avoid it. But the threat was always there, a shadow hanging over every village. This system of control set the stage for even darker chapters in the Inquisition's history. Up next, we'll explore the lives of the accused ordinary people caught in this terrifying web, their stories of survival and despair. It's a heartbreaking look at the human cost of the Inquisition, and it's coming up next. Chapter 3. The accused, lives caught in the crosshairs. Imagine being a regular person in medieval Europe, tending your fields or weaving cloth, when a knock at the door changes everything. You're accused of heresy, and suddenly, your life is no longer your own. In this chapter, we're stepping into the shoes of the accused ordinary men and women, from bakers to midwives, whose lives were upended by the Inquisition's relentless pursuit of confessions. We'll explore who these people were, how they ended up in the crosshairs, and the devastating impact of being targeted by a system that thrived on fear and false admissions. This is the human side of the Inquisition, where the thumbscrews Shadow loomed large. The accused weren't usually firebrand rebels or secret cult leaders. Most were everyday folks, living quiet lives in villages or towns. Then in the eyes of the Inquisition, anyone could be a heretic. A woman who brewed herbal teas might be labeled a witch. A man who grumbled about church taxes could be flagged as a doubter. Accusations often came from personal grudges. Think of a neighbor angry over a land dispute or a rival merchant looking to ruin a competitor. The Inquisition encouraged denunciations, offering anonymity to accusers. This meant you could be reported without ever knowing who betrayed you. In 1280s Toulouse, for example, a baker named Pierre was accused of heresy because he argued with a local priest over tithing. The evidence? A neighbor's word. That was enough to drag Pierre before a tribunal. Once accused, your fate was grim. The process started with a summons to appear before the inquisitors. Ignoring it wasn't an option. Fleeing marked you as guilty and you'd be hunted down. When you faced the tribunal, you were alone, often without a lawyer or defender. The inquisitors controlled everything. The questions, the evidence, even the witnesses. They'd present vague charges like spreading false doctrines, leaving you scrambling to guess what you'd done wrong. Denying the accusation led to interrogation, and if you didn't confess, the thumbscrew or other tortures waited. The system was built to break you. A woman named Agnes, from a 14th century French village, was accused of witchcraft after a child she cared for fell ill. She swore her innocence, but after hours of torture she admitted to casting spells. Agnes was exiled, her life and reputation shattered. The accused came from all walks of life. Women were especially vulnerable, often targeted for their roles as healers or midwives. The church saw their knowledge as suspicious, especially if it didn't align with approved teachings. Men weren't spared either. Scholars, craftsmen, even minor nobles could be accused if they crossed the wrong person. In 1320s Italy, a merchant named Giovanni was denounced for reading banned books. He was no heretic, just curious, but the inquisitors saw his learning as a threat. After torture, he confessed to heresy and lost his business. His family left destitute. Stories like Giovanni's show how the Inquisition didn't just punish individuals, it tore apart families and communities. What made this so terrifying was the randomness. Accusations could strike anyone, anytime. A single rumor could spiral into a full-blown case. In some towns, entire groups were targeted, like the Waldensians, religious sect in the Alps who preached poverty and simplicity. The Inquisition branded them heretics, and by the late 1200s, hundreds were arrested, tortured, or executed. The thumbscrew was just one tool used to force confessions, but its psychological weight was massive. People knew what awaited them if they resisted, and many confessed to avoid the pain, even if it meant lying. These false confessions fed the Inquisition's narrative, making it seem like heresy was everywhere, justifying their existence. The aftermath for the accused was brutal. Even if you confessed and were spared, punishment followed. You might be fined, losing everything you owned. Or you could be imprisoned, sometimes for life, in dank cells with little food. Public penance was common, being forced to wear a yellow cross on your clothes, marking you as a heretic for all to see. This wasn't just humiliation, it ruined your social standing. Neighbors shunned you, and finding work became nearly impossible. For those who didn't confess, or whose crimes were deemed too severe, the stake awaited. Burning was the ultimate punishment, a public spectacle meant to terrify others into submission. In 1310, a woman named Marguerite Porret, a mystic, was burned in Paris for her writings, despite never harming anyone. Her case sent chills through France, a warning to others. The accused had few ways to fight back. Some tried to appeal to local lords or bishops, but most were loyal to the church. Others fled, becoming outlaws, but the Inquisition's reach was long. A few brave souls resisted, like the villagers in Montélimar, France, who had suspected heretics in the 1320s. But resistance was rare. Fear was a powerful silencer. The thumbscrew and other tortures weren't just about pain. They were about erasing hope. The accused knew the odds were stacked against them. That knowledge crushed spirits before the metal ever touched their fingers. By the 14th century, The plight of the accused had become a grim reality across Europe. Their stories filled with betrayal, suffering, resilience, reveal the human toll of the Inquisition's quest for control. The system thrived on breaking people, turning neighbors into enemies and truth into a casualty. Next, we'll explore the tools of torture beyond the thumbscrew, diving into the grim arsenal the Inquisition used to extract confessions. It's a dark chapter in this story, and it's coming up next. Chapter 4. The Arsenal of Agony. Tools of Inquisition torture step into a dimly lit chamber. The air thick with dread, where the clank of metal and muffled screams paint a grim picture. Beyond the thumbscrew, the Inquisition had a chilling array of tools designed to break bodies and spirits, all in the name of extracting confessions. In this chapter, we're exploring the gruesome arsenal used to enforce the Church's will devices that went far beyond the thumbscrew in their cruelty. From racks to fire, we'll uncover how these instruments worked, why they were chosen, and the devastating impact they had on those accused of heresy. This is a dark dive into the mechanics of terror, so brace yourself. The Inquisition's torture toolkit was built for one purpose: to make people talk. While the thumbscrew was a favorite for its simplicity, other devices were far more elaborate and brutal. One of the most infamous was the rack, a wooden frame with ropes and pulleys that stretched a person's body. Your wrists and ankles were tied, and inquisitors would turn a crank, slowly pulling your limbs until joints popped or bones broke. The pain was unbearable, and many confessed just to make it stop. In 1311, a Spanish merchant named Ramon was accused of hiding heretics. He denied it, but after an hour on the rack, he admitted to crimes he couldn't even name. The rack wasn't just about pain. It was a spectacle, often used in front of witnesses to amplify fear. Then there was the strapado, a device as simple as it was cruel. Your hands were tied behind your back, and a rope hoisted you off the ground, sometimes with weights tied to your feet. The sudden drop dislocated shoulders, leaving you dangling in agony. This was a go-to method in Italy during the 1300s, where inquisitors used it to break even the toughest suspects. A tailor named Lucia, accused of witchcraft in 1340s Florence, endured the strapado for hours. She confessed to impossible things like flying to witches' sabbaths, just to be lowered. The strapado's genius was its reversibility. It caused excruciating pain without permanent marks, perfect for inquisitors who wanted confessions. Without obvious evidence of torture, fire was another tool, used both as torture and punishment. Inquisitors might hold a suspect's feet over hot coals or brand them with heated irons. The smell of burning flesh and the victim's screams were enough to terrify others into confessing. In 1290's Aragon, a farmer named Matteo was accused of denying the resurrection. When he refused to confess, inquisitors applied hot irons to his arms. He broke within minutes, admitting to beliefs he'd never held. Fire wasn't just physical torture. Was a psychological weapon, reminding everyone of the stake that awaited unrepentant heretics. Water torture, an early version of waterboarding, was also common. Victims were tied down, and water was poured over a cloth covering their face, simulating drowning. This method was used in the 14th century, especially in Spain, where inquisitors targeted suspected Jews or Muslims who'd converted to Christianity. A convert named Esther, accused of secretly practicing Judaism in 1350's Seville, endured this torment. Gasping for air, she confessed to crimes she didn't commit, her spirit crushed as much as her body. Water torture was favored because it left no scars, letting inquisitors claim they'd used gentle methods. The pear of anguish was a particularly sinister device, shaped like a metal pear. It was inserted into a victim's mouth, rectum, or vagina, and then expanded by turning a screw, causing internal damage. It was rarely used but deeply feared, especially for accusations of blasphemy or sexual sins. In 1320s Germany, a woman named Clara was accused of demonic possession. The threat of the pear alone was enough to make her confess, sparing her the worst but not the shame of public penance. The pear's rarity made it a myth-like terror, whispered about in villages to keep people in line. These tools weren't chosen at random. Each had a purpose, tailored to the Inquisition's needs. The rack and strapado were for drawn-out sessions, breaking resistance over time. Fire and irons delivered sharp, immediate pain, perfect for quick confessions. Devices like the pear were psychological weapons, their mere existence enough to terrify. The church had rules torture, couldn't draw blood or cause permanent injury, at least in theory. This is why non-lethal tools were preferred. They let inquisitors claim they were merciful while still inflicting agony. But in practice, these limits were often ignored, especially in remote tribunals where oversight was lax. The impact on victims was profound. Beyond physical pain, the psychological toll was devastating. Many lost their will to resist, confessing to anything to escape the torment. Others were broken permanently, unable to work or live normally after their bodies were ravaged. Families suffered to children watched parents dragged away, spouses left destitute when property was seized. In 1330s France, a village called Albi saw dozens accused of heresy. Torture sessions left the community fractured, with survivors shunned as tainted by their confessions. The tools didn't just punish individuals, they shattered trust, turning neighbors into strangers. By the 14th century, this arsenal of agony was a cornerstone of the Inquisition's power. Each device, from the rack to the pear, was a calculated choice designed to extract confessions and spread fear. The thumbscrew was just the beginning. These tools took the Inquisition's cruelty to new heights. Next, we'll explore how these confessions, often forced and false, were used to fuel the Church's campaign against heresy, weaving a web of lies that justified its authority. It's a chilling look at the power of fabricated truth, and it's coming up next. Chapter 5. The Web of Lies. How false confessions fueled the Inquisition. Imagine confessing to a crime you didn't commit. Your words twisted to condemn not just you, but others. This was the grim reality of the Inquisition, where forced confessions became a weapon to justify its power. In this chapter, we're diving into how these coerced admissions of any innocent under torture were used to paint a picture of rampant heresy, strengthening the Church's grip on society. It's a story of lies spun into truth, with devastating consequences. False confessions were the Inquisition's lifeblood. When someone broke under the thumbscrew or rack, their words weren't just a personal defeat, they were a tool to trap others. Inquisitors used confessions to name accomplices, real or imagined, creating a chain reaction of accusations. 1320s Languedoc, a farmer named Bertrand, tortured into admitting he attended a heretical meeting, was pressed to name others. Desperate, he listed neighbors, most of whom were innocent. Those names led to more arrests, more torture, and more confessions, spreading fear like wildfire. This cycle made heresy seem everywhere, proving the Inquisition's necessity. The Church didn't just want admissions, it wanted stories. Inquisitors pushed victims to describe elaborate details, secret rituals, demonic pacts, or meetings in moonlit woods. These tales, born of pain and fear, were recorded as fact. In 1340s Spain, a seamstress named Maria confessed to witchcraft after hours of torment. Her fabricated story of dancing with demons was read aloud in church, terrifying villagers and justifying harsher crackdowns. Such confessions were propaganda, making the Inquisition's mission seem urgent and divine. These lies had a broader impact. They turned communities against each other as neighbors were named in confessions and trust eroded. Entire towns like Carcassonne in the 1300s saw mass arrests after a single tortured suspect named dozens of heretics. The Church also used confessions to seize property, enriching itself while impoverishing families. A merchant in 1330s Italy lost his home after a false confession implicated him in a heretical sect. His wealth funneled to the Inquisition. By the 14th century, false confessions had built a self-perpetuating machine. Each coerced word fed the narrative of a world overrun by heresy, giving the Church an excuse to tighten its control. The human cost was staggering: lives ruined, communities fractured, all based on lies extracted through pain. Next will explore how the Inquisition's reach extended beyond local tribunals, targeting entire groups and shaping Europe's religious landscape. It's a tale of power and persecution, coming up next. Chapter 6. Beyond the village, the Inquisition's war on entire communities. Picture a quiet mountain village. Its people bound by shared traditions, suddenly torn apart by the arrival of inquisitors. The Inquisition wasn't just about targeting individuals. It grew to engulf entire groups, from religious sects to ethnic minorities, reshaping Europe's spiritual and social fabric. In this chapter, we'll explore how the Inquisition expanded its reach, hunting whole communities accused of heresy and using tools like the thumbscrew to crush resistance. This is the story of collective persecution, where fear spread far beyond the dungeon's walls. By the late 13th century, the Inquisition had shifted from chasing lone heretics to targeting organized groups.
Our one prime target was the Waldensians,
A Christian sect in the Alps who preached simplicity and rejected church wealth. Branded heretics for their beliefs, they faced relentless campaigns. In the 1330s, inquisitors swept through Piedmont, arresting entire villages. Families were interrogated, and torture forced confessions that implicated whole communities. A Waldensian named Paolo, tortured in 1335, named fellow believers under duress, leading to mass arrests. The thumbscrew wasn't just a tool for confession, it was a weapon to dismantle entire networks. Another group in the crosshairs was the Jewish population, especially in Spain. As the Inquisition evolved into the Spanish Inquisition by the late 1400s, it targeted conversos Jews who'd converted to Christianity but were suspected of secretly practicing their old faith. In 1480's Seville, hundreds of conversos were arrested based on flimsy rumors. Torture sessions, often involving crushing devices, extracted confessions of Judaizing. A merchant named Isaac, for instance, admitted to lighting Sabbath candles. After prolonged torment, though he swore he was a devout Christian, these confessions justified mass expulsions and executions, decimating Jewish communities. The Inquisition's tactics were systematic. Inquisitors would descend on a region, declare a period of grace for voluntary confessions, then begin investigations. Refusal to confess led to torture, and confessions often implicated others, creating a domino effect. The Beguns, a religious group of women, were accused of heresy for their independent spirituality. Dozens were tortured, their confessions used to label the entire movement as dangerous. Whole communities were uprooted, their members scattered or executed, their traditions erased. This broad approach had a chilling effect. It wasn't just about punishing the accused, it was about control. By targeting groups, the Inquisition sent a message: no one was safe, not even entire villages or faiths. In the 1340s, the town of Montaillou, in France, was nearly destroyed. When inquisitors arrested over 100 residents for alleged Cathar sympathies, families were torn apart and survivors lived under constant suspicion. The economic fallout was brutal: lands confiscated, trade disrupted, leaving once thriving communities in ruin. The human toll was staggering. Entire ways of life vanished, as sects like the Waldensians were driven underground. Cultural identities, like those of Jewish conversos, were suppressed under the weight of forced conformity. The thumbscrew and other tortures ensured compliance, but at the cost of trust and cohesion. Villages became places of silence, where speaking out risked everything. By the 15th century, the Inquisition's campaigns had reshaped Europe, stamping out diversity in the name of unity. Next, we'll dive into the public spectacles of punishment, from penance to burnings, and how they turned fear into a tool of control. It's a grim chapter, and it's coming up next. Chapter 7. Spectacles of Fear, Public Punishment, and Control. Imagine a crowded town square, the air thick with tension, as a condemned figure is led through a jeering mob. The Inquisition didn't just punish in private dungeons. It turned punishment into public theater designed to terrify and control entire populations. In this chapter, we'll explore how the Church used spectacles like public penance, floggings, and burnings at the stake to cement its authority. These weren't just punishments, they were carefully staged events, meant to make everyone watching think twice before defying the Church. Let's uncover the grim power of these displays. Public punishment was the Inquisition's way of broadcasting fear. After confessions, often forced by torture, like the thumbscrew, came the consequences, and they were meant to be seen. One common penalty was public penance. Convicted heretics were forced to wear a San Benito, a yellow garment marked with crosses, and paraded through town. In 1370s Toledo, a carpenter named Diego, accused of doubting church teachings, was made to walk barefoot through the streets, his San Benito, a badge of shame. Crowds mocked him, and his business collapsed as neighbors shunned him. The humiliation was deliberate, turning the accused into living warnings. Floggings were another public spectacle. Victims were stripped and whipped in town squares there, cries echoing as a lesson to onlookers. In 1350s Barcelona, a woman named Teresa, accused of witchcraft, endured 100 lashes in front of a crowd. Her crime was based on a neighbor's false testimony, but the public display ensured no one questioned the verdict. These whippings weren't just about pain, they were about showing the church's power to break defiance physically and socially. The ultimate punishment was burning at the stake, reserved for those deemed unrepentant or whose crimes were too severe. These executions were massive events, drawing hundreds or thousands. In 1321 Paris, a scholar named Amalric was burned for his unorthodox writings. The crowd watched as flames consumed him, a stark reminder of the cost of heresy. Burnings were choreographed for maximum impact, wood piled high, executioners solemn, priests chanting prayers. The message was clear: defy the church, and this is your fate. These spectacles worked because they played on fear and community pressure. Neighbors who might have sympathized with the accused stayed silent, afraid of being next. In 1360s Lisbon, a group of alleged heretics was paraded before execution, their San Bonitos displayed in churches afterward as trophies. This public shaming turned friends into strangers, isolating victims and discouraging dissent. The church also used these events to reinforce its moral authority. Framing punishments as divine justice, the economic and social fallout was devastating. Families of the punished often lost everything: homes, livelihoods, status. In 1340s Siena, a merchant's family was left destitute after he was burned, his property seized by the church. Entire towns felt the ripple effects, with trade slowing as fear stifled daily life. By the 15th century, these public displays had become a cornerstone of the Inquisition's power, turning fear into a tool to enforce conformity. Next, we'll explore how the Inquisition's methods evolved over time, adapting to new challenges and spreading its influence across continents. It's a story of relentless expansion, and it's coming up next. Chapter 8. The Inquisition's evolution, adapting and expanding picture, a machine that grows stronger with time. Its reach stretching across borders and even oceans. The Inquisition didn't stay static. It evolved, adapting to new challenges and spreading its influence far beyond medieval Europe. In this chapter, we'll trace how the Inquisition transformed from a regional campaign against heresy into a global force, refining its methods and intensifying its grip on society. From the rise of the Spanish Inquisition to its reach in the New World, this is the story of an institution that refused to fade, fueled by tools like the thumbscrew and an unrelenting drive for control. By the late 1400s, the Inquisition had entered a new phase with the establishment of the Spanish Inquisition in 1478. Authorized by Pope Sixtus IV, unlike its medieval predecessor, this was a state-controlled machine. Driven by Spain's monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, to unify their kingdom under one faith, it targeted conversos and Muslims who'd converted to Christianity, suspected of secretly practicing their old religions. The thumbscrew and other tortures remained key. But the Spanish Inquisition introduced greater organization. Tribunals were permanent, not traveling, with meticulous records and a network of spies. In 1480s Granada, a converso named Diego was tortured into confessing he kept kosher, leading to his family's arrest. This centralized system made the Inquisition more efficient and more terrifying. The Spanish Inquisition also innovated its approach. It used autos do fe, elaborate public ceremonies where the accused were judged, penanced, or executed. These weren't just punishments, they were propaganda, showcasing the church and crown's power. In El Sejour Civil and Auto de Fsa, dozens of conversos paraded, some tortured into confessions beforehand. The spectacle drew thousands, reinforcing fear and loyalty. The Inquisition also expanded its scope, targeting not just religious dissent, but moral offenses like bigamy or sodomy, broadening its reach into everyday life. As Spain built its empire, the Inquisition followed. By the 1500s, it had crossed the Atlantic to the New World, targeting indigenous peoples and colonists. In 1570s Mexico, a native leader named Tlecalel was accused of idolatry for maintaining Aztec rituals. Tortured with crushing devices, he confessed, and his community was forced into Christian conformity. The Inquisition's methods, torture, surveillance, public punishment, were exported, adapting to new cultures while enforcing the same rigid control. This global reach turned local traditions into heresy, erasing centuries of indigenous practices. The Inquisition also refined its psychological tactics. Fear of torture often outweighed its use. In 1500s Peru, rumors of the Inquisition's arrival made colonists confess voluntarily, hoping for leniency. The thumbscrew's reputation preceded it, breaking spirits before it touched flesh. Meanwhile, the Inquisition's bureaucracy grew, with detailed manuals like Torquemada's 1484, instrucciones guiding inquisitors on everything from interrogation to sentencing. This standardization made the system relentless, operating like a machine across continents. By the 16th century, the Inquisition had become a global institution, its influence felt from Madrid to Mexico City. It adapted to new contexts, targeting different groups while keeping its core mission, control through fear and forced confessions. Its evolution showed its staying power, reshaping societies far beyond Europe's borders. Next we'll explore how resistance to the Inquisition emerged, from secret defiance to outright rebellion, and the risks people took to fight back. It's a story of courage against crushing odds, and it's coming up next. Chapter 9. Sparks of Resistance. Defying the Inquisition. Imagine hiding your beliefs. Whispering defiance in the dead of night, knowing a single misstep could lead to the thumbscrew, or worse. Despite the Inquisition's iron grip, pockets of resistance emerged, from quiet acts of subversion to bold rebellions. In this chapter, we'll explore how people fought back against the Church's terror, risking everything to protect their faith, culture, or freedom. This is the story of courage in the face of overwhelming odds, where the human spirit refused to be crushed. Resistance took many forms, often hidden to avoid detection. In Spain, conversos forced converts from Judaism or Islam secretly practiced their traditions. In 1490s Toledo, a converso family led by Miriam held Passover in a concealed basement, risking torture if caught. They used coded language and trusted only close kin, knowing informers lurked everywhere. These quiet acts preserved cultural identity, defying the Inquisition's demand for conformity. Similarly, in 1520s Mexico, indigenous groups hid sacred artifacts from inquisitors, maintaining rituals in remote caves despite the threat of punishment. Some resistance was bolder. In the 1340s, the Waldensians in the Alps organized secret networks to shelter their preachers, moving them between villages. To evade inquisitors, a Waldensian named Mateo, for example, traveled disguised as a merchant, spreading teachings despite the risk of capture. When caught, he refused to confess, even under torture, inspiring others to resist. Such defiance was rare but powerful, showing the Inquisition wasn't invincible. In 1242 Avignon, France, locals took drastic action, murdering 2 inquisitors to protect their community. The killers were hunted down, but their act sparked hope in others. Women, often targeted as witches or heretics, also resisted. In 1370s, Germany, a healer named Gretchen was accused of witchcraft for her herbal remedies. Instead of confessing under torture, she denounced the inquisitors as hypocrites. her words spreading among villagers before her execution. Her defiance inspired others to question the church's authority, planting seeds of doubt. These acts, though small, chipped away at the Inquisition's aura of untouchability. Resistance wasn't without cost. Those caught faced brutal reprisals, torture, imprisonment, or burning. In 1510 Spain, a group of conversos in Zaragoza planned to flee to Portugal, but were betrayed. Tortured with crushing devices, they confessed, and most were executed in a public auto.f. Yet their attempt inspired others to try escaping, creating underground routes to safer lands. Entire communities sometimes resisted, like the village of Monteu in the 1320s, where residents hid Cathar sympathizers, delaying inquisitorial raids for years. By the 16th century, resistance had grown more organized in some areas. Protestant reformers in Northern Europe openly challenged the Church, fueled by stories of inquisitorial cruelty. While not always direct, their writings weakened the Inquisition's moral authority. In Spain, secret networks of conversos and moriscos persisted, preserving their identities despite constant danger. These acts of defiance showed the Inquisition could be challenged, even if at great cost. Next, we'll wrap up with the Inquisition's legacy, its decline, and how its shadow lingers in history. It's a powerful reflection, and it's coming up next. Chapter 10. The Inquisition's Legacy, Echoes of Fear and Lessons. Learn to picture a world where the fires of the stake have gone cold, but the scars of fear linger in the stories passed down through generations. The Inquisition, with its thumbscrews and terror, eventually faded, but its impact shaped history in profound ways. In this final chapter, we'll explore how the Inquisition came to an end, the lasting effects it left on society, and the lessons we carry from its dark legacy. This is a reflection on a time when fear ruled, and a reminder of why we must never let it happen again. The Inquisition didn't vanish overnight. By the 17th century, its grip began to weaken in Europe. The rise of the Enlightenment, with its focus on reason and individual rights, challenged the Church's absolute authority. In Spain, the Inquisition lingered into the 19th century, but its power dwindled as secular governments took hold. It was officially abolished in 1834, nearly 4 centuries after its peak. In the New World, it faded earlier, as colonial societies shifted focus to governance over religious purity. The thumbscrew and other torture tools were retired, but the damage they caused lingered. The legacy was deep and far-reaching. The Inquisition reshaped Europe's religious landscape, stamping out diverse sects like the Cathars and forcing conformity on groups like the conversos. Entire cultures, from Jewish communities in Spain to indigenous traditions in the Americas, were suppressed or erased. In 1600s Mexico, for example, native spiritual practices were nearly wiped out, replaced by a rigid Christianity enforced by fear. Socially, the Inquisition bred distrust, as neighbors turned into informers and communities fractured under suspicion. Economically, it devastated families, with property seizures leaving thousands in poverty. The psychological scars were just as profound. The fear of being accused, tortured, or publicly shamed lingered for generations. In 1700 Spain, descendants of conversos still lived cautiously, wary of old accusations resurfacing. The Inquisition's public spectacles like autos da-f left a cultural memory of terror, a warning against questioning authority. Even today, the word Inquisition evokes images of cruelty and oppression. It's a testament to its enduring shadow. Yet, the Inquisition also sparked change. Its excesses fueled the Protestant Reformation, as reformers like Martin Luther cited its brutality to challenge the Church. It also laid the groundwork for modern ideas of justice, as later generations recoiled at its methods. The concept of due process and the right to a fair trial emerged partly as a reaction to the Inquisition's rigged tribunals. In a way, the pain it inflicted pushed society toward valuing individual freedom. What can we learn? The Inquisition shows what happens when power goes unchecked, when fear is weaponized, and when truth is twisted for control. It's a warning about blind zeal, whether religious, political, or ideological. Today we see echoes of its tactics in surveillance, coercion, or the silencing of dissent. The thumbscrew may be gone, but the urge to control through fear persists. By studying this history, we're reminded to protect truth, question authority, and guard against systems that crush the innocent. That's the story of the Inquisition, a tale of terror, resilience, and hard-won lessons. If this journey through history gripped you, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the past. Drop a comment below what shocked you most about the Inquisition. Let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll see you in the next video.